Happy end of 2024. Welcome to my favorite time of the year, reviewing the results at the end of year survey that all 1,032 of you filled out. Thank you for taking the time to do so, and thanks for watching my videos this past year. Let's dive into this mountain of data with what everyone probably expected. The most popular event of 2024 was the Care for Tomorrow event, and the driving reason behind that seems to be what is the most popular event building, the Eco Sanctum. In case you missed it, it's the first event building to provide a forge point boost up to 3% in the highest ages, and it provides a significant number of forge points, goods, and finished special production item fragments too. This proves that an event building does not need to provide attack boosts for it to be popular, it just needs to have boosts or productions catering to what players want that are extremely overpowered. I find it interesting to look at the runners-up. For best event, that is the history event, no doubt due to the minigame, which we'll get to later. For best event building, the runner-up is actually the Yukitomo Tower. It's not what I was expecting to take second, but it's a decently solid building from the 2024 winter event, giving good army boosts and Quantum Incursions bonuses. Now, wherever there are bests, there are worsts. The worst event of the year by a landslide is the 2024 Halloween event, which, let's be honest, was to be expected thanks to the removal of the card game. You could almost say it's now history. I'm curious how much of the score is based around being sad at the minigame rather than disliking the actual event, however. The runner-ups were both variations of the Idletown minigame in the St. Patrick's Day and Fellowship events, which are starting to get a little bit tedious. The worst event building was a lot more contentious, however. That honor goes to the Serene Flamingo Paradise from the first event of 2024, the Wildlife event. It only barely squeaks out a loss from the Apex Grove Sanctuary from the History event. Neither of them had great productions, though to me, the Bastion Gates houses from the Grove Sanctuary makes it very useful to this day. From 2023 to now, some events have definitely made a bit of headway in popularity. The Care for Tomorrow event snagged 20% of the total votes as the soccer event. Of course, the Halloween event took a massive hit to its popularity, losing 37% of the total votes that it had in the previous year to other events. Now, if you had to choose, which do you think the best minigame of the 6 unique ones we had this year would be? The winner this year is the same as 2023, which is of course the amazing card game, though this year it was only available in the history event. The runner-up is the Pop Locks minigame, which is good news, as that's coming in the next event. Despite the card game winning in the best minigame though, it massively lost share in the favorite event minigame category. In 2023, it took home nearly 50% of the vote, a far cry from the 30% this year. When we compare the difference in ratings, all other minigames but the Idletown game gained popularity, with the merge game having the greatest uplift. Taking home the worst minigame is none other than the wheel from the Halloween event. However, I again have to wonder here how much is due to it not being the card game rather than the actual minigame we got. Not far behind is the Idletown game, something that I think a lot of players are getting heavily apathetic to due to it taking such a heavy time investment and it reappearing twice a year. In terms of spending money and diamonds on events, the Care for Tomorrow event takes the prize for both categories, and both diamond and cash spending was higher in the second half of the year. However, when I compare the percentages of my audience that spent money in diamonds this year, it looks like overall, spending was a bit lower in events. Moving past the best events, I had you all rank each event based on whether you loved it or hated it. This chart shows the average result with a bigger bar meaning you liked it more. In this rating, the winter event actually overtakes the history event for second place. Year to year, most events were rated quite a bit lower than their 2023 versions, with only the winter event seeing a sizable uplift. I also had you rank events based on difficulty. This chart shows the average result with a bigger bar meaning it was harder. The hardest event and minigame for that matter is the Idletown minigame. I do find it interesting that the other shared minigames, the Pop Locks of the Fall and Wildlife events and the random tiles of the winter and summer events, are so different in terms of difficulty rating. For all intents and purposes, they were exactly the same events, just with different themes and event buildings. In some generic event data this year, more of you want to see fewer events than in 2023. I think this is something that comes mainly from two things based on reading your responses. First would be the repeated event minigames. Events currently feel repetitive in their minigames, especially when we had only 6 unique minigames across 10 events. The second main issue with events seems to be in pacing. A common sentiment many of you represented is just in the time events take and how long they stretch. About 2/3 of the year had events running, and the breaks between events felt even shorter as many had mini challenges in the gaps. Potentially adding to the wish for fewer events is more players feeling events are getting harder for free-to-play players. Free-to-play is abbreviated F2P. As you can tell from 2023, it has shifted quite significantly. And as you may guess, when asked if players preferred skill or RNG-based events, they chose skill overwhelmingly, giving us this chart. Pair you the chart? Hopefully in one of the new event mechanics they're cooking up, we get some interesting strategies to mess around with. Let's finally move on from events though. Let's talk about the game at large. Nearly half of you said you think 2024 was a good year for Forge of Empires, and I'd have to agree with that group. Well, there was a lot that was rough this year. We got some really nice things added to the game. Speaking of which, the winner of Best New Feature is the Quantum Incursions, with 43% of the vote. Unfortunately, Flat Mode missed the cutoff for being added to the survey, but I'm sure that would have ranked highly as well. As it is, second place falls to the settlement improvements, with the unit hospital being far and away voted the worst new feature. Historical allies and Quantum Incursions were the most controversial, with each getting a large number of both best and worst votes. Looking at mini challenges, these are the rankings of some of the common quest conditions. Recruiting previous age units and producing current age goods are rated the hardest for good reason. Remember to plan for these quests. When you age up, leave some buildings in the previous age for unit production, and remember to check the spreadsheets I post over on Discord in the spreadsheets channel to know if you'll need a goods building placed or not. When asked what your biggest concern with Forge is going into the new year, far and away the largest is the balance between what you can get by spending money versus not. As we'll talk about later, the sentiment is shifting quite strongly to feeling like one needs to spend to be competitive. The secondary concern is power creep, followed by the quality of gameplay. Also, the other category was quite massive, and you all had a lot to say. The biggest response I saw was the game taking a lot of time, which is understandable. However, I then saw just as many responses saying they didn't want to play either Quantum Incursions or Guild Battlegrounds or events or whatever feature. Remember, it is a game. If you don't enjoy something, don't play it. You're not required to, and that'll cut down on the time it takes to play. I found I enjoy the game a lot more when I don't play Guild Battlegrounds, and now I have a lot more time to do what I enjoy. In terms of how many worlds you all play, as you may expect, most are at the lower end of the spectrum, giving us an average of 2.5 active worlds per player. That's down from last year, but only by about 10%. As players have more to do in the game, they play fewer worlds. Let's move on to spending. Nearly half of you are in my camp of not spending anything this year, while the rest of you drop off as the quantities increase. What's interesting is when we compare these to last year. Proportionally, the $1 to $99 category lost the most players, while the $100 to $499 category gained the most, at least in terms of those of you who watch my videos. The proportion of players in my audience who have spent before shrank slightly compared to last year by about 2%. Most of you also said that you've spent roughly the same, but more viewers said that you spent more this year than those that said they spent less. Now we get to my two favorite questions. Is Forge of Empires free to play, and do you need to spend to have fun in Forge of Empires? For the first, the majority agrees that Forge of Empires is free to play. However, the share of players strongly disagreeing has doubled, and the disagreeing group has increased by 13.5% since 2023. Still the minority, but definitely growing. As per the second question, if you need to spend to have fun, most disagree, but as with the prior question, the pool of people agreeing with the statement has increased significantly. Something fun happens when we break down the responses by the amount of money spent this past year. As you may expect, the more players spend, the more they tend to think Forge of Empires is not free to play. I guess it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Similarly, when we break down whether you need to spend to have fun by spending, the heavier spending players definitely feel like they need to spend to enjoy the game, while those spending less or not at all don't agree with that sentiment. Far more interestingly, though, in both cases the sentiment has shifted across the board, with all divisions shifting more towards the game favoring spending in terms of winning and in having fun. I think something that sums up this sentiment pretty well is how Quantum Incursions boosts were given out. They started as being accessible from the feature buildings and settlement buildings, things all players can get without spending. The next place to be added were limited buildings and the Gold League building. Limited buildings are, well, limited, so if you're a free-to-play player unable to get large quantities, they run out. As for permanent boosts, those Gold League buildings are for all intents and purposes paywalled, either by real money or diamond spending. It took another 4 months for event buildings with permanent incursions boosts that all players can get to be added, and another 4.5 for those permanent boosts to be added to the main event building. To be clear, I think it's a good thing the boosts were given out slowly, but for the first 2 new ways to get them being relatively limited or paywalled systems puts a bad taste in most players' mouths. Despite the potential negativity that can come from saying that, I'm excited to see what 2025 brings for Forge of Empires. In terms of what you want, it looks like the Great Building changes are the most exciting, followed by future events and the Guild Expeditions update. It should be a good year, and I look forward to making many more videos about the game. A spreadsheet with all the data used for this video can be found in the description if you want to play around with it. You'll also find the link to join my Discord server if you want to chat about the game or anything like that. And that, as always, I'll see you all next year.